Then out spake brave Horatius, the captain of the gate. To every man upon this earth death cometh soon or late. And how can man die better than facing fearful odds for the ashes of his fathers and the temples of his gods?
Marisol could have jumped for joy, if doing so was not so painful. Jericho was here. She was fighting Malum, and at the same time, the psionic sarcophagus was splintered and cracked. Surely this had to be the end. A lightning storm erupted in the street as Malum and Jericho sent psychokinetic blasts against each other. Amidst the brilliant flashes of light and thunderous bursts, Conti unfurled her wings and dove into the wreckage of Paradox headquarters. "Isn't this great?" Marisol said. "We've got all of the big three here. We can beat Malum now." Conti squawked, speaking in her own language as she grabbed Marisol with one set of talons, pulling her toward an opening in the wall. A sharp pain ran up Marisol's left leg and she grabbed onto a windowsill, propping herself up. "What? What is it?" Marisol asked. Again, Conti could not reply in English. Marisol could tell that Conti was trying to relay a very important message, something that clearly could not wait. The albino peahen shook her head in exasperation, then let go of Marisol and fluttered to a nearby computer desk. Conti turned around and projected a telepathic wave from herself to Marisol. For her own part, Marisol was briefly able to see the shimmering wall of purple light racing toward her before she was hit by it. Marisol felt a rushing sensation as her vision swam. She was plunged, head first, into one of Conti's recent memories. Conti and Mina were trying to fight Cassandra for control of the broken gate. Cassandra made full use of her nanite armor, generating an obscuring black fog around herself that lashed out and injured Mina. Conti tried to burn the nanite armor with soulfire, only for Cassandra to counter with psionics of her own. Just when it seemed as though they would fight to a stalemate, Jericho and Emily emerged from the gate. Before Cassandra had a chance to respond, Jericho had used her own powers to sever Cassandra's link to Malum, doing in seconds what Akira could do in minutes. Once Cassandra was incapacitated, Jericho spoke to Conti using the galactic common language that was so pervasive in the Stormbreaker universe. Malum Ralpakin cannot be defeated in the real world. That was what Jericho had said. Simply killing him would not work, and Conti's allies would not be able to destroy the sarcophagus before being exhausted, overwhelmed, or both. Conti knew Jericho well. The two had met before in one of Blake's stories, many chapters before Jericho's apotheosis. She begged her old comrade to explain why Malum could not be bested in the real world. "Haven't you figured it out?" Jericho asked. "Blake was planning for Malum to play a role in future stories, and wrote the story to that effect. Malum has plot armor. The same goes for some of the creations pulled into this catastrophe. Unless something drastic changes the situation, your battle with Malum could continue indefinitely." Recoiling in horror, Conti begged Jericho to tell her how this obstacle could be overcome. "One of you already stumbled upon the answer and you all ignored it," Jericho had replied. "Malum got this far by abusing the power of the author. So long as he is protected, events will transpire to prevent his death, even if you somehow manage to destroy the sarcophagus. In turn, he won't be able to kill those of you who are shielded." Obviously, Conti asked which creations did not have plot armor. She was going to take full advantage of Jericho's vast well of knowledge left over from her brief moment of omniscience. "Vetu, Mocha, Ushka, and Tenna," Jericho had replied. "Vetu is doomed by the plot. Mocha is a character type called the Sacrificial Lion. Ushka and Tenna are from unfinished stories. Blake hasn't given them an ending yet. Even though Marisol was only a passenger in Conti's memory, she could feel the rising sense of panic inside of Conti. One more time, Conti begged Jericho to reveal the way Malum was to be defeated. And then, Jericho gave Conti the answer. When Marisol emerged from Conti's memory, it felt as though she was emerging from underwater and taking a desperate breath of air. Cold air stung her face, and the sounds of battle made her ears throb. "Jesus Christ!" Marisol breathed. Conti nodded as if to say, "You know what to do." At that moment, a loud explosion sounded from outside. Marisol took another glance out of the window. Now that she knew what to look for, Marisol realized that several creations were benefiting from plot armor. Ever since this fight kicked off, there were moments when certain creations should have been killed or seriously injured. Conti being blasted out of the sky by lightning, Aisling getting chokeslammed into a wall, Trig resisting Ushka's assault with ease, Vetu foolishly announcing her presence before attempting to ambush Akira. Poking her head out of the window, Marisol could see it happening in real time. The explosion she just heard was another building collapse across the street. Sebakira reacted with improbable speed, raising a psionic shield to protect herself and several nearby creations. She moved almost like a video game character going through a pre-scripted reaction. A short distance away, Malum emerged from a blue cloud of soul fire, his clothing singed but otherwise unharmed. He launched a Psyvolt at Jericho, who deflected it effortlessly. "You do not seek to kill me, Jericho," Malum taunted her. "Above such brutality." Akira shouted from a nearby snowbank. "Hey, that's my line! Now you're just stealing my dialogue!" Akira used telekinesis to tear up a large chunk of the street, sending asphalt and concrete flying towards Malum. As he parried the attack, Jericho's voice came out of the snow squall, even though Jericho herself was nowhere to be seen. "It's not the way I was written, Malum. You know that," Jericho replied. "You could say I went a little soft after the war in heaven. Besides, just as it's going to be with Akira, it's not my fate to defeat you." Malum laughed and then turned on the spot to confront Toa Mami and Vetu, who had tried to ambush him from the darkness. He threw both of the Partogan queens back effortlessly. "The most powerful scion in the universe doubts she can defeat me? Is that true?" Malum taunted Jericho again. Jericho's laugh echoed through the blizzard. With most of the city and streetlights broken, her laughter seemed otherworldly. "I guess it's my turn to steal dialogue, Akira. But that's okay. Blake steals dialogue from so many movies and TV shows for his stories that this should be second nature." Suddenly, very suddenly, the wind died down and the snowstorm lost intensity. For a few moments, everyone could see more than 2 feet in front of their faces. It became plainly obvious that Jericho was standing directly behind Malum, her psionic repeater aimed at the back of his head. When she spoke, her voice seemed to come from everywhere. "Don't be too proud of the psionic dominions you've learned to build. The ability to control minds is insignificant next to the power of the author. You may have learned something about how our fictional worlds are made, but you haven't learned everything. Trust me. You've barely touched the surface." Malum turned around and tried to lunge at Jericho, but she was gone again. She slipped away and melted into the darkness in the same stealthy manner as her adoptive mother, Mira Mihaka. When Malum tried to pursue, Mira and Sebakira launched themselves at him from both the left and right. Marisol did not see how the rest of the ambush played out. She was already running. She darted back into the conference room and grabbed the reality perforator, straining as she went. Aisling yelled at her, but Marisol ignored her. Struggling to keep the silver orb in her grip, Marisol ran to the edge of the chasm, where Trigg's fight with Tenna had caused the floor to collapse. The cafeteria below was now so full of snow that it was impossible to figure out a safe point to jump down. All of the wreckage was buried and impossible to see. "Blake!" Marisol screamed. "Blake, are you down there?" "I'm here in the lobby," Blake yelled back. "Hold on." A moment later, Blake appeared. He was carrying the modified musket he had used in Shiatown only a few days ago. "We found a bunch of Paradox employees in a panic room," Blake said. "Hurton and I took some of Callie's people to help them evacuate. Also, did I just hear Jericho's voice? What the hell is going on out there?" Marisol started to ask how Blake knew it was Jericho's voice, but then she remembered what Sebakira had said about all of Blake's female characters talking in the same voice. Blake was probably the only person who could actually tell them apart. Marisol screwed up her courage. She knew exactly what needed to be done, but actually following through and doing it would be another matter altogether. "Blake, I need you to come with me," she said. "I've got the reality perforator, and we've got a chance to take Malum down." Blake started to climb up the wreckage, looking for a way to reach Marisol. The building shook as the fighting outside continued. "How the hell did you get the perforator?" Blake asked. "Trigg found it," Marisol replied. "Malum had it locked inside of some psionic storage thing, but Trigg got it open." "Great," Blake replied, heaving himself up onto the second floor. "Now we just need to get the creations to pin him down long enough to—" "No." Marisol's voice was so firm that she caused Blake to stop talking. "No," Marisol said again. "We have to go with my plan, the one I came up with on the plane. It's the only way." Blake's face contorted. "I told you, that's a moonshot of an idea." "It's all we've got," Marisol said. "We're not going to overwhelm Malum out there, don't you remember? Malum has plot armor. He's supposed to be in the sequel to Song of the Solitaire." A look of dawning realization appeared on Blake's face. He swore. "Soulfire Symbiont," Blake cursed, uttering the name of an unwritten story that would have been the second chapter in Malum's villainy. "God fucking damn it!" Marisol nodded. "Blake, you plan out your stories so far in advance that most of those creations out there have plot armor. Jericho says if we don't shake things up, that fight out there could go on forever." "Or until Malum wears us down," Blake added. Fuck, I still don't like your idea, Marisol, but I think we've got to try it now. "It worked in The Last Heroes, didn't it?" she said. "Back then, my characters weren't leaping off the page," Blake said. "We won't know if this crazy plan works until... until we drag Malum kicking and screaming through the gate. Hell, I still don't think this plan is going to work." Marisol stood up. In one hand, she clutched the reality perforator. It was so heavy she had to stoop to hold it. In the other, Marisol produced her smartphone. She had been thrown around and beaten so much in the fighting that the screen was badly cracked, but it was still usable. Marisol reached out, offering the perforator to Blake. Knowing what was coming, Blake pulled his own smartphone out of his pocket and then took the reality perforator in his free hand. Both creators were now holding tightly onto the silver orb. Marisol flicked her thumb and then let out a sigh of relief. "I don't know how, but I've still got mobile data here," she said. Blake looked down at his phone. The web browser was open to Paradox Interactive Forums, and he saw a little message icon at the top right corner of the screen. Marisol had reused a subject line that Blake himself had only used once before, while writing The Last Heroes 2 years ago. Conversation with Chosenpai. Permission to borrow one of your characters? Hi, McCavity. I want to write a fanfiction using your character, Malum Ralpakin. May I have permission to borrow him for the duration of my fic? With one thumb, Blake started to type out a reply. Marisol said, "I don't know what it takes to set off this stupid perforator. You'd better spell it out just to be safe." Her words were punctuated by another loud blast and shouting from the street. For the first time in days, Blake allowed himself to smile. Then he obliged Marisol's request. "I will grant permission. You and I are now both Malum's creator." As soon as Blake sent the message, he punched a button and navigated away from the conversation screen. In moments, the front page of his most recent fanfiction appeared on the screen. Marisol and Blake looked longingly at Last Days of the Emerald Isle. That story felt so far away now. Typing with one hand, Blake hastily prepared a message. "Remember what I said all the way back in The Last Heroes?" Blake said. "Once I post something publicly, it's canon and there's no takebacks. We're committed after this." "Do it," Marisol said. Blake hit the post button, and an update appeared on Last Days of the Emerald Isle. Dear readers, I am happy to announce a new collaboration with Cho Senpai, the beta reader who helped me out with Song of the Solitaire and Last Days of the Emerald Isle. She is working on an all-new fanfiction project that will include the Great Khan as a guest character, in much the same way I used to have guest characters in The Last Heroes. Make sure you're subscribed to Cho Senpai's AO3 page so that you don't miss what she's got in store. As soon as Blake's message was posted, Marisol felt a slight shudder in the reality perforator. Her fingers sank deep into its outer membrane, but not far enough to touch the core. A gasp of surprise told her the same thing had just happened to Blake. "We're doing this," Marisol said. "We're doing this," Blake replied. Jericho was stalling for time. She knew what needed to be done, and she was keeping Malum's attention on herself until the moment arrived. Moving nimbly around the battle space, Jericho kept Malum in a constant defense. Whenever she was not launching psionic attacks at Malum, Jericho was supporting the other creations as they made their own attacks. By this point, Callie, Dak, Mocha, and Varian had completely run out of ammunition for their guns. Sebakira, Kanti, Tenna, and Vetu were taking it in turns to launch psionic attacks to avoid exhaustion, while Ushka and Ashling were out of the fight entirely. The sarcophagus was damaged, but still functional. Killing Malum outright would do no good, and the team was running out of energy. Malum was going to outlast his attackers. Unless... "The creators!" Dak yelled. "They're coming out!" Marisol and Blake appeared in a hole on the second floor of Paradox HQ, holding the reality perforator between them. Malum turned away from Jericho. "Come to face justice for your crimes against creations, Robinson," Malum called out. Without waiting for an answer, Malum sent a shimmering wave of psionic energy toward the two creators. Toa Mami rushed into its path, Soulkeeper held high. The psionic blast detonated right in front of her, never reaching the creators. As Toa Mami fell to the ground, Marisol screamed, "Blake, now!" With a great heave, Marisol and Blake swung their arms and launched the reality perforator into the air. It landed on the road with a painfully loud clank, digging a crater into the pavement where it landed. Before the perforator came to rest, Blake and Marisol were already jumping down to ground level. Blake got back to his feet first and started running toward the reality perforator. "No!" Malum shouted. He too began sprinting through the snow. Marisol and Jericho were the last to start moving, but Jericho intentionally held back, allowing Malum to get in front of her. Blake and Malum reached the reality perforator at the same time. Desperate, Blake unshouldered his musket and lunged toward Malum, jabbing the end of the barrel at his foe as though it was a spear. Malum grabbed onto the barrel, trying to deflect it away from him. That was the moment when Malum's grip on his copy of the Soulkeeper's sword slackened. Jericho pounced, grabbing the crystalline blade in both hands and allowing the rest of her body to go limp. All of Jericho's weight was suddenly on Malum's wrist. He cried out and let go of the sword. Jericho tossed the Soul Keeper copy into the air and then tackled Malum from behind, just as Marisol reached the reality perforator. For one agonizing moment, Malum, Blake, and Marisol were all touching the reality perforator, their fingertips sunken into the non-Newtonian membrane. From her position atop Malum's back, Jericho was able to touch all three of them at the same time. She unlocked the deepest reserves of psionic power within her own mind and enveloped all three fighters with psionic energy. A millisecond before it happened, Malum realized what Jericho was going to do, and he let out an angry roar. Blue soulfire erupted, covering his whole body, but it was too late. A column of purple light shot down from the sky. Jericho, Malum, Blake, and Marisol were caught in the beam and spirited away. The psionic teleportation was completed in an instant. Marisol screamed and threw herself away from Malum. He was still wrapped in soulfire. Recoiling from the immolation, Marisol felt a sharp pain in her back. She had collided with a large metal archway standing in the middle of a windswept forest. She could smell and hear the nearby river. A flurry of movement brought Marisol back to the present. Blake and Malum were fighting over the reality perforator, while Jericho had taken a step back. Jericho looked at Marisol, pointed at Blake, and then hunched over. There was a flash of purple light, and Jericho was suddenly inside of a translucent bubble, a sustaining sphere. She slumped over inside of the bubble, unconscious. "Blake!" Marisol screamed. "Musket!" Marisol's words reached Blake just in time. Malum aimed one hand at Blake, and a jet of blue light shot out of his palm. Blake dove to one side and retrieved his musket off the ground. Simultaneously, the bolt of blue light entered the broken gate and vanished. "Flash! Flash! Flash!" Blake yelled. Marisol threw herself to the ground, closing her eyes and covering her ears as she went. Blake pulled the trigger. His modified musket went off with a blast louder than a lightning strike. Blake was thrown backwards and his gun fell to the ground. Marisol's vision filled with white light, even though she was face down with her eyes closed. And a moment later, there was a loud thud as Malum hit the ground as well. Marisol looked up. Jericho was still in her sustaining sphere, locked in a psionically induced stasis. Blake was getting back to his feet, while Malum was lying face down in the dirt. He had gotten a full blast from the anti-psionic weapon. "Okay, this is it," Blake said. "Get the perforator. I'll drag his ass over to the gate." Marisol grabbed the reality perforator in one hand and helped Blake as best she could. Malum was clearly still conscious, but was too badly stunned to resist, at least for now. As they got closer to the gate, the light stones embedded into the archway started to glow. Marisol frowned as she tried to concentrate. She knew where she wanted to go, where she wanted to take Malum, but she had no way to know if the gate would respond to her. "Still time to abort this whole plan," Blake said. "We don't know if you can go through the gate." "Creations can use it to come into our world," Marisol panted. "Why not the other way around? Did you write anything that says I can't?" "No," Blake admitted. "Then we've got to take the chance," Marisol said. Blake, Marisol, and Malum's semi-conscious body were just 5 feet away from the gate now. Marisol took a moment to look around and peered through the gate. She could see something through the archway, the faint outline of a mountain. It was the setting of the short story she wrote on the plane. "Okay, I think we've got a chance," Marisol said. "Now we just need to—" Marisol never finished her sentence. At that moment, a shape came barreling through the gate. In the moment it happened, Marisol had not given a single thought to the blue light Malum projected into the gate. But now that something was coming out of the gate at her, Marisol knew what had happened. Malum had called for help, and the very last of his allies had arrived on the scene. Aaron Bowie, a background character from My Father's War and frequently frazzled employee at the bar, had lunged through the gate and run directly at Marisol. It all happened so quickly, so suddenly, that Marisol could do nothing but stare open-mouthed at the 8-inch kitchen knife clutched in Aaron's fist. Aaron let out a wordless, guttural scream before bringing the knife down to stab Marisol. And then the world turned sideways as Marisol was shoved out of the way. She landed on her side as Blake started to grapple with Aaron. Marisol blinked, trying to clear the blood away from her eyes. Sitting up, Marisol realized that the blood splattered on her face was not her own. Blake had either been stabbed or slashed in the moment he shoved Marisol to safety. "Go! I've got this!" Blake shouted as he struggled to wrest the knife out of Aaron's grip. Marisol seized the reality perforator and started tugging at Malum's limp form. She was so close to the gate, she could see the God of Ink character she had hastily created in the last few moments before the final battle. But Malum was too heavy. The reality perforator was also too heavy. But Marisol knew she needed to take both through the gate with her. "Help!" Marisol screamed. "I can't! It's too heavy!" Blake and Aaron suddenly fell out of her field of view. Marisol could see their shadows flickering in the glow of the lightstones. She could see someone raise the knife and bring it down, followed by the horrific sound of someone being stabbed. "No! Help! Someone help!" Marisol screamed. And then the stasis field around Jericho broke. The translucent bubble popped and faded from view. Jericho caught herself, waking up as she nearly fell to the ground. Jericho looked into the shadows, at the spot where Blake and Aaron were fighting. Then she looked back at Marisol and Malum. The Great Khan was regaining consciousness. He was putting his hands on the ground, trying to stand up, to overcome the grip Marisol had on his arms. Jericho aimed one palm at Marisol, and a powerful telekinetic force swept across Rothelman Island. Marisol, Malum, and the reality perforator were caught up in what felt like a hurricane-force wind. Marisol screamed as she was lifted off her feet. At the last second, she remembered to keep a tight grip on both Malum and the perforator. At the very moment Marisol passed through the archway of the broken gate, she dug her fingers into the membrane of the reality perforator, pushing as deep as she could until her fingertips found and touched the inner core.